The first attempt was made at work, somewhere where I knew people were nearby to intervene. I cut my wrist with my keys. I was absolutely terrified, alone, and had given up on life. I went in to take a shower to wash off the blood, only to make more cuts with a razor blade. I paged my psychologist and had a friend take me to the ER. The cuts were fairly superficial, and there was definitely a great deal of ambivalence about my decision. I was admitted to the psychiatric ICU and was locked up in my own room. I was absolutely hysterical. I looked for anything and everything to cut my wrist with: the jagged edge of a Kleenex box, a plastic knife, the unraveled end of a toothpaste tube. I was still suicidal when I left the hospital 7 days later. I did okay for a couple months before I really started sinking again. I was cutting my wrist on a daily basis. I think this went on for a week before my family found out and took me to the hospital. This time the cuts were a little bit deeper, and there was a little less ambivalence than the first incident. I was there for 5 days. I pretended that things were back to normal so that I could get the hell out of there. Things were okay again for a few months. Then I started doing it again. If I was upset, I cut my wrist. This time I was serious about doing it. Several times, the bleeding wouldn't stop and would soak through a huge Band-Aid. I started overdosing on aspirin before I cut my wrist, thinking that just maybe I would bleed a little easier and it would go faster. This went on for over a week before I went into the hospital again. I landed in the ER after overdosing on Compazine, a handful of Advil, and a handful of Neurotonin, and several aspirin. I had also made a large cut in my wrist. I was drifting in and out of consciousness on the way to the hospital, and had a great experience having my stomach pumped. My heart rate was irregular. That was the first time I could have really died. I was only in the hospital for 3 days and left AMA. I wanted to go home. That was in July. I started again in September and almost went to the hospital again, and probably should have. I cut my wrists for 2 weeks, then stopped. My boyfriend/fiance told me that he would leave me if it happened again. This was after the third hospitalization. I decided that it wasn't worth it. If I wasn't going to do it all the way, I wasn't going to do it at all. I don't know what the future will be like. It seems like every time something stressful comes up, I start cutting my wrist or overdosing on medication.